What's up, y'all? Today, I would like to talk about the definition of a groove. So, what is it? Everybody kind of has a sense of like what it is, but probably hard to explain. I have a perfect definition. It has been peer-reviewed and is used by many of the top artists in the world. The definition is as follows. A groove is a consistent inconsistency. So in other words, it's a inconsistency, but it's consistently inconsistent, if that makes any sense at all. If you listen to some of the old funk records, like Parliament Funkadelic, for instance, James Brown, Zapp, and Roger Troutman, listen really carefully to the kick drum, the hi-hat, the bass guitar or synth bass versus the actual guitar, the keyboard part, the clavinet part, the horns, the tambourine, the shaker, percussion. You have all these different elements, and I guarantee you, if you pull any one of these audio files, you pull it into your DAW and slow it down to about half speed, or even slower if you want to hear super exaggerated. Slow it down to about half speed, and you're going to hear a lot of inconsistencies. And it's kind of goofy when you listen to it at that level of detail, because it just sounds totally wrong. It just sounds off. It's like, what in the world are these guys smoking? Like, their timing is all over the place. It's like the blind leading the blind. What's going on here? You got the kick drums early, you got the hi-hats late, you got the tambourine rushing the beat, you got the keyboard lagging the beat. What's going on here? But if you really listen even closer, you'll find that these inconsistencies are kind of constant throughout the song. And that, my friend, is where the groove lies. It's in that space between where the kick hits and the hi-hat hits. It's in that space between where the guitar plucks and where the guitar chunks, or where the shaker goes up and then it comes down again, right? Or I just did that backwards. Whatever, you get what I'm saying. So it's that space in between. It's not about lining everything up exactly onto the grid. And I'm sure if any of you out there have done that before, you end up with something that sounds lifeless, robotic, doesn't have that feel to it. It doesn't make you want to shake your hips, doesn't make you want to bob your head, right? How you get that is by taking your elements in your drum kit and your percussion section and just nudge it off of the grid. Get away from the grid. In my opinion, the further away from the grid, the better. So just move it all around, experiment, see what you like. I would also recommend listen to some of these electronic music producers, and you'll find that even though the music is electronic, it's sequenced, it's synthesized and programmed, it still has a very obvious human feel. It feels good. A really great example of this is a Jill Scott song called It's Love. It's a super popular song, big hit song, and if you listen to the drums and the hi-hat especially in that song, it is completely all over the place, but it's consistently all over the place to where it feels like a groove. Now, this brings me to another concept known as a pocket, right? What is a pocket? People throw these terms around and nobody cares to take the time to actually define it. A pocket is basically another word for your groove. The pocket is that space in between those elements. It's like a little empty space, right? And you don't fill it in with anything. It's silence. It's a gap. And the bigger that pocket is, the more kind of heavy your groove is. So here's a little experiment you can do in your DAW with the drum sequencing plugin of your choice. Take a kick drum, put it on all 4 beats, right? Quarter notes. 4 on the floor kick drum. Take a snare, put it on beat 2 and beat 4. So you got boom, bop, right? Put it on a loop so it keeps going. Now take your hi-hats. Put a hi-hat, a closed hi-hat, right? Put a closed hi-hat on every 8th note in that bar. So you have, right? Take the entire hi-hat and select it, the entire sequence there. and keep the drum pattern playing on a loop, and take the entire hi-hat pattern and sort of scoot it a little bit behind the beat, right? And just go, you don't have to be super like precise with it. Just sort of move it and listen as you're moving it. So move it maybe by the millisecond. So let's say 10 milliseconds, 15, 20 milliseconds. And what you're going to hear is this sort of anticipation of the kick and the snare. And what it does is it gives that kick and snare a lot more impact. And you feel it before the hi-hat comes in. And it's just a little tiny gap there, a little tiny pocket. But you have this space before the hi-hat. What it does is it makes your hi-hat feel more human. It makes it feel more like a groove. But you have that 4 on the floor and that snare still banging away, sort of solidly holding together that beat. Here's the next phase of the experiment. Move your hi-hat back, put everything back on the grid, line it up quantized, right? Now, take every other hi-hat, so and, all the ands, right? And just select those. Now play the same beat on a loop, just move the upbeat hi-hats now. What you get is this sort of swing rhythm effect on the hi-hat. So it's going to be, and the more you move it, it's, eventually it's going to just sit on top of the next hi-hat. So that's how you know you've gone too far. So reverse direction, push it back a little bit. Now grab all the hi-hats. So the quantized on-beat hi-hat, as well as the swinging off-beat, upbeat hi-hats that you've nudged. Take the whole hi-hat sequence and nudge it just a little bit more to the back end of those beats. So you have sort of these two layers of groove happening. Another thing you can do, next phase, take your snare drum and move it just a tiny bit forward. So it brings a little bit, just a tiny amount, tiny percentage more impact to your snare. And you notice it that much more. Now as you move that snare further and further away from that grid, you're going to get this sort of wonky kind of feel, but you combine that with the hi-hat and you get these spaces in there. I always like to take a nice triplet in my kick drum. So if you're going boom, 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 bubba-da-bump. So bubba-da-bump, right? That little triplet there. So bubba-da-bump, you have a little triplet there, and you can sort of take the triplet and scoot it in different ways, and it'll sort of make your triplet feel slightly differently. So it's sort of pulling back the curtain on the idea of rhythm and groove and drum sequencing, and sort of experimenting with this idea of groove, this consistent inconsistency. So now if you move this stuff too far, you're going to end up with a Flying Lotus record, and you're not even going to know where the one is. You might lose everybody, but it's worth a try just to experiment with it, just to get your feet wet with it. And then next time when you go to play on your machine or your whatever drum pad or MIDI controller keyboard of your choice, go in and try to replicate that feel, and you'll find that not only do your drum tracks feel way more funky, but your skill of playing and tracking drums is going to start going through the roof. Everybody's going to be hitting you up to do their drum tracks because they're going to feel so much better than these other guys out here just quantizing everything, because they think, oh, well, that's the modern mainstream sound. You know, it has to be quantized because that's what the trap guys do, or that's what the pop guys do. You know what? Make music that sounds good. I mean, plus, any of the pop songs that are on the radio today were recorded, you know, a year, 2, 3, 4 years ago. So you're imitating something that's already dated, and by the time your song comes out, it's going to be extra dated. So that is my definition of a groove, complete with experimental applications you can apply to your own music. But let me know what you guys think. Do you have a different conception of a groove? Do you have a better, simpler definition maybe? Do you have any drum tracks that you would recommend to other producers or other songwriters out there, or other examples of great songs, great funk records that have particularly wonky, inconsistent drum tracks? Let me know in the comments. We'll keep the conversation going. But the, of course, final context to this is when you start bringing in other instruments. So if you have a lot of instruments playing at the same time and they're all scooted and nudged all over the place, you're just going to have a mess. So one thing that I learned from Parliament Funkadelic is every single individual element in the mix has to not only groove with the drums and the percussion, but it also has to have enough space in that part to allow it to gel with the other parts in the mix. That way, if you leave a little gap, so say you have a guitar part, alright, so you got your guitar part there. You want your keyboard track to sort of fill in those gaps, and then when the guitar is playing, leave that gap in the keyboard part. Don't be one of these crazy gospel keyboardists that has to just fill in every single nanosecond of every beat. So take your keyboard part, alright, so you have that space on the one, the guitar comes in, right in that space there, you got your keyboard. So you see what I'm kind of going for, right? You have your guitar, then you hear keyboard, then you hear guitar, then you hear keyboard. Maybe for one split second you hear both of them hit together. Make sure that those are actually hitting together there. But then you can take both of those lined up parallel and scoop them accordingly to where it feels right with the drum track going. So I don't want to get too technical into it, but I guess basically the point of this video is take your stuff, nudge it around, move it around for really like high frequency drum percussion type stuff. Later tends to work better for low frequency, short sustain type sounds. I find that slightly earlier sort of feels good, but it depends on the song, right? If you're going for a real low key joint, move everything back a little bit, make it a little lazy, right? If you're going for a real up-tempo driving death metal, heavy metal, metalcore punk rock thing, maybe move it up a little bit, make it anticipate so that it sort of drives you into that next section, right? All of this stuff also applies to your vocal. I mean, go listen to some Michael Jackson records if you want to hear a vocal that really grooves. And plus, Michael Jackson is the kind of guy that will be beatboxing and all this stuff going on too. So he's not only singing the vocal, but he's also adding a little tiny bit of percussion into wherever gaps he's hearing in that groove. So it all fits together, it all lines up and gels together. No one thing steps on anything else. But when it all comes together, you just feel this massive, intense sort of wall of funk, this sort of wall of frequency. And everything has its own little space in the course of that bar. So use some inconsistencies and don't forget to keep them consistent. That's how you get the money.